Leonard Marshall, one of the greatest warriors the NFL has ever known, etched his name into New York Giants history as an icon of strength and courage. From a poor black boy in Franklin, Louisiana, he overcame every barrier to rise among the greatest legends of American football. Joining the Giants in 1983, Marshall quickly became the soul of the steel-clad Big Blue Wrecking Crew defense. Alongside Lawrence Taylor, Carl Banks, and Harry Carson, forming one of the most fearsome defensive lines in history. He was selected to the Pro Bowl twice, earned All-Pro honors twice, and helped the team win Super Bowl 21 and 25 games that defined the golden era of the New York Giants. With over 5 career sacks, he ranks among the team's all-time greats, revered by fans as the Wall of New York. Leonard was not just an athlete. He was the living definition of resilience, a man who never backed down, whether facing legendary quarterbacks or the fiercest challenges of the league. His career was an anthem of the American spirit, rising from poverty, fighting with willpower, and triumphing through faith. But behind that glory lay a silent, cruel, and painful tragedy. The fiery collisions of his playing days left him with injuries invisible to the naked eye. After the stadium lights dimmed, Leonard Marshall entered another battle, a war against his own body. His memory began to fracture, chronic headaches lingered, sleep vanished, and fear enveloped him as he failed to recognize the faces of loved ones. Doctors called it CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, the legacy of thousands of collisions he once prided himself on enduring. But instead of surrendering, Leonard chose to stand again. He became a voice for former players suffering similar injuries, traveling across America to advocate for the safety of the next generation. In every slow step, in every trembling speech, he carried an enduring message. If my pain can save one child, it's all worth it. Leonard Marshall fought his entire life, not just to win on the field, but to hold on to the humanity left in the shadows of his memory. Franklin, Louisiana, a small town nestled among endless sugarcane fields and the salty air of the Gulf of Mexico, where the hum of cicadas blended with the monotonous clank of shipyard machinery. There, in 1961, Leonard Marshall was born in a small wooden house at the end of a dirt road, amid poverty and the quiet prejudice of racial divides that seeped into every breath. His father, Leonard Sr., was a foreman in an old shipyard, a tall, tough man forged like steel, rarely smiling and even more rarely embracing his son. His mother, Lily, a quiet woman, spent her days washing clothes for neighbors, cooking simple meals of beans, rice, and canned meat. In a sweltering house without air conditioning, young Leonard would lie listening to the distant whistle of trains, imagining it was the roar of a stadium crowd. He didn't know why he loved that sound so much, only that in a world too quiet, only noise made him feel alive. School was another cold place for Leonard. Classmates mocked him as too slow, too big, not fast enough to run, not smart enough to win. He was an average student, unnoticed in class, ignored by others. During recess, Leonard often sat alone under an old oak tree behind the schoolyard, throwing stones at empty beer cans, imagining he was tossing a football to an imaginary coach. No one knew that the quiet boy was learning to endure loneliness, learning to live with pain long before football found him. Every afternoon, after helping his father haul wood at the shipyard, Leonard would sneak to the school field as dusk fell, the streetlights casting faint glows. He practiced throwing, running, falling, and getting back up, clothes caked in dirt. No coach, no teammates, just his ragged breaths and the vague image of a cheering crowd in his mind. Some nights, his father caught him running across the dark field, sweat dripping onto the ground. He'd stand silently for a moment, then turn away, leaving Leonard to his mad dream. The Marshall family wasn't one for dreaming. In that house, work, discipline, and obedience were sacred. Dreams only led to disappointment. His stern father believed the game was for those with no future, But Leonard couldn't stop. With every run, he heard something calling not glory, but hope, a fragile light that helped him endure the long days reeking of oil and the shipyard's shouts. At 12, a fight broke out in the schoolyard. Leonard was shoved down by older kids, blood streaming from his forehead, their laughter ringing in his ears. That day, Leonard didn't cry. He stood, wiped the blood, and whispered, "Someday, you'll remember my name." That vow, quiet but resolute, followed him his entire life. In the years that followed, while other kids dreamed of becoming workers or mechanics like their fathers, Leonard kept practicing in secret. He used a tattered old ball, filled rice sacks with sand for weights. His arms ached, his shoulders swelled, but pain became his only companion. Each fall, he told himself, he was learning to live with pain long before football ever found him. Pain taught him patience, taught him that silence wasn't weakness. It was how the strong survived in a world that didn't hear them. One rainy night, his father stepped onto the field, seeing his son in an old football uniform, knees bruised, eyes blazing under the yellow streetlight. He stood watching for a moment, then said softly, "Don't waste your life on a game." Leonard didn't answer. He just bowed his head, clutching the ball tightly, as if holding his entire future. He didn't know that the game, his father's pointless pursuit, would save his life, lift him to glory, and then destroy him, bit by bit. Leonard Marshall left Franklin on a sweltering morning in 1979, carrying an old canvas bag, a few thin shirts, and the heavy gaze of his father standing silently behind the window. He offered no words of luck, only a curt judgment. Don't waste your life on that game. But Leonard had made his choice long ago. He knew staying in Franklin meant a life confined to the clang of shipyard hammers and the stench of oil, while Baton Rouge, harsh as it was, offered his only shot at escaping fate. LSU greeted him with 100-degree heat, the cold stares of coaches used to seeing rookies crumble, and teammates mocking whispers, "That big guy's slow as a turtle." Leonard had no full scholarship, no backers, no safety net. All he had was willpower and a fragile belief he could endure. The first practice was hell. Under a scorching sun, Leonard was knocked down repeatedly, nose bleeding, shoulder torn, hands trembling with pain. The coach screamed in his face, but he didn't respond. He just stood, picked up his helmet, got back in line, and charged again. That night, long after others left, Leonard stayed, practicing alone, falling and rising again. If pain is the language of greatness, he told himself, I'll speak it fluently. His years at LSU forged him like steel, sweat mixed with blood, dreams with reality. Each morning he woke before dawn, jogging the practice field in damp fog. Each night, he trained until darkness swallowed Baton Rouge's sky. Coaches began noticing the quiet rookie who rose no matter how many times he was hit. In the locker room, they started calling him Beast, not for aggression, but because he never stopped. Physical pain didn't scare Leonard. It became a companion, part of the survival ritual. He learned to breathe through agony, smile when he fell, and endure when others quit. The dorm was run down, student meals meager, but he never complained. When exhaustion hit, he thought of his father, who doubted his strength to go the distance. Every tackle, every fall on scorching grass was his response not in words, but in action. By 1982, opportunity struck. LSU faced Alabama, the South's legendary team. No one believed in LSU, let alone remembered Leonard Marshall until that day. He played like a storm. 3 sacks, 7 tackles, nearly dismantling the opponent's offense. When the final whistle blew, LSU won, the stands erupted, and Leonard, drenched in sweat and blood, was named defensive MVP. The coach approached, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said softly, "That's what heart looks like." But Leonard didn't celebrate. After the game, he sat alone in the locker room, head throbbing, heart pounding, hands shaking as he unwrapped his wrist tape. In the mirror, a darkened face, eyes sunken, but a quiet smile bloomed. For the first time, he felt he belonged. LSU didn't just teach Leonard to play football, it taught him to survive. In a place where steel and blood merged, he learned pain wasn't the enemy, it was the fire forging his will. Each game was a battle, each injury an invisible medal. By season's end, he was no longer the lost Franklin boy. He'd become a true warrior, a man of discipline and grit, ready to face anything to hold on to his dream. And as LSU's stadium lights shone on his face, in that moment, Leonard knew he'd been born again. He couldn't foresee that those same lights of victory, of glory, would one day return to burn away his memory, body, and soul. LSU was where the legend began, but also where fate quietly sowed the seeds of Leonard Marshall's tragedy, a man who learned to endure pain long before football found him. In the spring of 1983, with the Gulf of Mexico's breeze still carrying the scent of salt and ripe sugarcane, Leonard Marshall received the call that changed his life. The New York Giants Legends of the East selected him in the second round, 37th overall, in the NFL Draft. It was the moment the boy from Franklin, once told by his father, "Don't waste your life on that game," wept for the first time. In his small Baton Rouge room, Leonard clutched the crisp blue jersey, staring at the NY logo as if holding the world in his hands. "Mom, I made it," he said, and she only nodded, eyes brimming. But he didn't know that Blue Dream was also the door to a real hell, one not everyone survived. New York was another planet. From quiet Franklin to a city of millions of honking horns, Leonard was overwhelmed. Reporters hounded like wolves, fans were cold, and coaches didn't care about a rookie's hard luck story from Louisiana. Bill Parcells, the man with eyes like blades, sized Leonard up at his first practice and said only, "Show me you belong here." Beside Parcells was a young, sharp, quiet assistant named Bill Belichick. Those two, with their ruthless hunger for victory, saw in Leonard what others didn't, a fire that never died in the eyes of a man who'd learned to bear pain since childhood. The Giants' summer training camp was a battlefield. 95-degree heat, collisions like thunder, every practice a test of survival. Leonard was slammed to the ground repeatedly by veterans twice his size. His shoulder bruised, lips split, knees bloodied, but he never uttered a complaint. He just stood, gave a faint smile, whispered, "One more rep." When doctors urged him to rest for injuries, he shook his head. "I'm fine." Then he'd dive into the next drill, as if stopping meant vanishing from existence. His body grew accustomed to bruises, to the grind of teeth in collisions, to the cold sting of stitches after games. Parcells watched him through his rookie season. At one team meeting, he stood, pointed at Leonard, and told the room, "If you can't hurt, you can't play." And this man understands that. The words were both an honor and a sentence. Leonard knew, in this world, pain wasn't to be avoided, it proved you still existed. The Big Blue Wrecking Crew, the Giants' legendary defense, was forged in blood, sweat, and screams. Lawrence Taylor, Carl Banks, Harry Carson, and now Leonard, the final steel wall on the defensive line. They didn't just stop opponents, they crushed anything in their path. Each collision brought the sound of cracking bones, but Leonard rose. Each split lip brought a smile. Pain no longer scared him. It was his most loyal companion. Yet amid the glory and grueling training, Leonard remained the lonely Franklin boy. While teammates partied in Manhattan, he returned to his room, gazing at a photo of his parents on a wooden dresser. He remembered his father's words, the sweaty evenings on the old school field, the yellow streetlights of Franklin shining on a kid who dreamed of stadium cheers. Now he had it all: fame, position, money, but his heart felt empty. The Giants won, crowds roared, but Leonard only heard the ringing in his head after each tackle. A dull ache ran down his spine, his hands numbed in sleep. As a nurse bandaged a gash on his arm, he asked quietly, "Does the body get used to this?" She just shook her head, but Leonard knew he was already used to it. The season ended with Leonard hailed as the team's top rookie. Papers praised him. Coaches lauded him. Teammates respected him. But when the locker room lights went out, he sat alone, hands cradling his head, eyes fixed on the wet concrete floor. He understood this dream wasn't a gift, it was a trial. He wasn't born to play football, he was born to endure it. Parcells once said, "Football's not a game, it's a survival test." And Leonard felt that truth deeper than anyone. In the Giants' world, the strongest weren't those who scored the most, but those who stood tall despite a battered body. New York taught Leonard the harshest lesson. Glory and pain were inseparable. While the world saw a rising star, only he knew each step forward left a new scar. At 22, Leonard Marshall had become part of the Big Blue wrecking crew, but in his heart, the Franklin boy still whispered amid the clash of steel, "Don't waste your life on a game." And as the season closed, Leonard smiled, wiped his sweat, stood on the empty field, and told himself, Leonard didn't play football, he survived it. In 1984, Leonard Marshall entered his second season in the Giants' blue jersey, and the world began to realize that behind the quiet demeanor of this Louisiana boy was a true storm. The New York Defense Big Blue wrecking crew was becoming every team's nightmare, with Lawrence Taylor as the flame, Carl Banks as the blade, and Leonard as the cold wall at the center together. They turned the field into a battlefield. Each of Leonard's tackles rang out like thunder. Every time he broke through the offensive line was an earthquake. They said he didn't just take down quarterbacks, he devoured them. In the 1985 season, he recorded 15.5 sacks, a terrifying number that left the press in awe. Leonard was named to the Pro Bowl and All-Pro teams, hailed by American television as the quiet storm of New York. But behind the spotlight, behind the cheers, was another, darker, lonelier truth. Amid grueling practices, painkillers became a familiar companion. A small bottle in his jacket pocket, a few pills before game time, a few more after every fall. "We all did it," Leonard said years later, "because it was the only way to keep going." His helmet always had a small crack on the left side, his armor stained dark with blood. Coach Parcells called it a badge of honor. But Leonard knew better. Each crack was a warning. His body was starting to rebel. After every game, his head pounded like a hammer, his ears rang, and the stadium lights stung like needles. Some nights, he lay in the dark of a hotel room, unable to open his eyes, his head vibrating like an empty drum. Teammates knocked to invite him to dinner, and he'd only whisper, "I just need a minute." But that minute stretched into hours. On the field, Leonard was still a monster. He read a quarterback's movements just from a shoulder twitch, charging with a speed that terrified opponents. When they hit the ground, the stands erupted, but Leonard, panting, sweat mixed with blood, only looked up at the night sky, wondering if he could feel anything beyond the pain. His teammate, Harry Carson, once recalled, "He'd forget plays mid-game and still sack the quarterback." Leonard laughed when he heard that, but deep down, he knew it wasn't a joke. Sometimes he really did forget the play called in the huddle, even the name of the opposing player. He just charged forward on instinct, driven by the drumbeat in his head, the only rhythm left after thousands of collisions. In the locker room, teammates called him the Hammer. He spoke little, only smiling when they teased him. No one knew that after each win, Leonard often sat alone long after the others left the field, hand gently rubbing his neck, eyes closed against the dizziness. He heard the fans outside, the reporters, the cameras, but in his head, there was only the droning sound of blood rushing behind his eardrums. Once, when a reporter asked how it felt to be selected for the Pro Bowl, Leonard just said, "It's not what people think. I'm just tired." The quote was cut from the broadcast because no one wanted to hear the truth from a hero. Coach Parcells often said, "Pain is temporary, pride is forever." Leonard believed that, until the pain stopped being temporary. His right hand began to go numb. Sleepless nights stretched on. Every morning, his head felt heavy, but his body got out of bed automatically, like a machine running without a soul. He lived in the rhythm of the game practice. Fight, recover, then hurt again. That year, the Giants made the playoffs, their defense praised as an impenetrable steel wall. Leonard's name was celebrated, written about, plastered on magazine covers. But no one saw the nights he lay curled up in a hotel room, lights off, hands clutching his head, trying to stop the relentless shaking. He missed his mother, the small wooden house in Franklin, the smell of the sea, and the quiet evenings of his past. In New York, he had everything: fame, money, victories, but he'd lost his last shred of peace. After the 1985 season, Leonard stood on the stage with Giants legends, camera flashes glinting off his sweat-soaked face. He smiled, but in that smile was an unnameable exhaustion. The glory was so bright, it made him forget that every victory came at a cost, and his body was already sending distress signals. That day, the papers wrote, "Marshall, the unstoppable wall of New York." But when night fell, that man lay alone in a dark room, head still ringing, heart pounding in his chest like it wanted to break free. He stared at the ceiling, thinking of tomorrow, of the next collision, then closed his eyes and told himself, one more game, just one more. Outside, the stands roared, "Marshall! Marshall!" Each time he brought down a quarterback, the crowd exploded like thunder. They celebrated his strength, intoxicated by his brutality. But no one saw that behind the cheers was a man slowly trading his memory, his health, his sanity. To the fans, Leonard Marshall was the symbol of beautiful violence, the man who made every opponent tremble. But when the stadium lights went out, all that remained was his labored breathing and the relentless pain in his head. He understood a truth the world never saw. The crowd cheered his violence. No one saw his pain. In the winter of 1986, New York's sky was shrouded in cold mist, and in the heart of that city, a team was writing the greatest story in their history. After years of being mocked as the team of failures, the New York Giants finally stood at the gates of glory. Leonard Marshall, the silent warrior of the defense, stepped onto the Rose Bowl field on the 25th of January 1987 for Super Bowl 21. The crowd roared like thunder, blue and white flags waved, and California sunlight glinted off his helmet. Leonard stood among his teammates, heart pounding, feeling the kind of air that comes once in a lifetime, the moment before victory. He clenched his fists, took a deep breath, and charged into the game as if his entire life had led him there. The Broncos had John Elway, the brightest star of the era, but that day, Elway couldn't escape the storm called the Big Blue Wrecking Crew. Lawrence Taylor, Carl Banks, Harry Carson, and Leonard Marshall crushed every hope Denver had. Each tackle was an explosion. Every fall a piece of the Giants' souls soaring. When the final whistle blew, the scoreboard read 39-20, and the New York Giants were world champions. Leonard collapsed on the field, hands trembling as he raised the Lombardi trophy. Champagne sprayed, teammates embraced, and in that radiant chaos, Leonard shouted into the shower of light, "We did it!" That night the hotel phone rang. On the other end was his father's voice, a man who'd never spoken gentle words. "I'm proud of you, son." 5 words, but they left Leonard speechless. All the years of endurance, all the blood and sweat, had finally earned what he'd craved most: recognition. He gripped the phone, wanting to say so much, but his throat tightened. When his father hung up, Leonard sat in silence for minutes, tears mixing with the champagne still on his cheeks. But when the lights dimmed, the cheers faded, and the adrenaline wore off, Leonard felt the real pain. His left shoulder was swollen, every movement a grinding creak. His head throbbed so fiercely he vomited repeatedly in the hotel bathroom. Each step felt like a hammer striking his skull, the ringing in his ears unending. He slumped over the sink, gripping the edge, breathing in gasps. Maybe it's just exhaustion, he told himself. But deep down, he knew something was wrong. When the team trainer checked on him, Leonard just smiled. "I'm fine, just tired." No one pressed further. In the world of champions, pain was not to be spoken of. "Champions don't complain," Parcells had said. and Leonard knew that if he complained, they'd only see weakness, so he hid it all behind a smile. The next day, as headlines screamed, "Giants' Glory," Leonard rode through Manhattan's Victory Parade, waving from an open-top bus to thousands. He still smiled, still waved, still wore the champagne-stained number 70 jersey, but behind his sunglasses, his eyes were heavy. Inside that body, his shoulder had a partially torn tendon, his head still spun. When the parade paused, Leonard tilted his head, and the world blurred for a moment. He heard someone call his name, but the voice seemed to come through a thick layer of water. A flicker of fear passed. Then he flashed another smile for the cameras. No one noticed. Only he knew this victory had taken a piece of his soul. That night, Leonard sat in his hotel room, staring at the Lombardi trophy on the table. He didn't touch it. Its metallic gleam reflected his face, tired, battered, eyes sunken. Outside the window, New York never slept, millions celebrating, while he, the man who gave them reason to cheer, sat in darkness. The pain radiated from his neck to his temples, then spread to his chest. He closed his eyes, trying to push it all away, but the crowd's chants echoed in his head, relentless. "Marshall! Marshall!" The cheers he'd dreamed of as a child now pounded in his brain, heavy, loud, unending. When the sun rose, Leonard put on his practice gear and walked into the training room as if nothing had happened. Parcells looked at him, nodded. No one asked how he felt, and he didn't need them to. In the world of giants, silence was the language of loyalty. Leonard knew his body was starting to pay the price, but he kept moving forward because he'd never learned how to stop. Sometimes, in fitful sleep, he heard his father's voice again. "I'm proud of you, son." And though the pain still lingered, he smiled, because it made it all worthwhile. The 1986 season was Leonard Marshall's first peak, a summit built on bone, blood, and painkillers. As the final confetti fell at the Rose Bowl, Leonard looked up at the sky, letting the paper flakes settle in his hair, on his aching shoulders. From a distance, it looked like snow falling under the lights, heartbreakingly beautiful. But up close, you'd see something cloudy in his eyes, as if his soul was tiring before his body gave out. The confetti fell like snow covering the first cracks in his mind. In the winter of 1990, as cold winds swept across the San Francisco sky, Leonard Marshall and the New York Giants stepped into the greatest battle of his life, the NFC Championship game against the San Francisco 49ers Empire. It wasn't just a game, it was a clash of two eras, Bill Parcells' Blue Army and the Big Blue Wrecking Crew defense facing the NFL's uncrowned king, Joe Montana. Before the game, Leonard sat silently in the locker room, shoulders still aching, head heavy, but his eyes burned like fire. He knew this might be his last chance to prove he was still New York's steel wall, the man who never retreated from pain. "It's just another game," he told himself, but deep down he knew this wasn't an ordinary game. It was where destiny awaited. The game began amid howling winds and collisions like thunderclaps. Montana dropped back, passed, escaped, then was crushed again. The Giants' defense was a relentless storm, rising higher. In the third quarter, with 12 minutes left, Montana stepped back to pass. Leonard, from the right defensive line, broke through two blockers, charging at him like a bullet. In that fleeting moment, only two things existed: light and sound. A dry crack echoed, amplified by broadcast microphones resounding across America. Leonard Marshall's hit sent Joe Montana spinning through the air before crashing hard onto the cold turf. The ball slipped from his hands. The stands fell silent for a second, then erupted like an earthquake. The Giants regained possession. The announcer screamed, "That was the hit heard around the world!" But while New York exploded in joy, Leonard stood still. He watched Montana lie motionless as medics rushed in. Stadium lights shone on his mud-caked hands. As Montana was carried off, Leonard bowed his head. He knew he'd created a moment that would be remembered forever, but he didn't expect it to become a curse. The next day, headlines blared, "The Monster Who Ended Montana." A hit Giants fans called legendary, others deemed a sin. TV replayed the collision hundreds of times, the sound of breaking bones becoming the soundtrack of sports news. Overnight, Leonard Marshall went from hero to haunted. After the game, as the team celebrated, Leonard sat alone in the locker room, clutching his shoulder, eyes empty. Lawrence Taylor slapped his back. "You killed him, Leonard." He only nodded, silent. When everyone left, he stayed, turning on the TV to watch the replay. The crack of bones, Montana's fall, and Leonard, the man who delivered the hit, felt no pride, only emptiness. He whispered, "I never wanted to hurt him. I just wanted to win." But the press didn't care for that truth. They twisted his words, making him a symbol of brutality. To the public, Leonard Marshall was no longer a man of faith, and he was the destroyer of legends. Days later, Leonard visited Joe Montana in the hospital. He stood at the door, unsure what to say. Montana, neck braced, face pale, looked at him and gave a faint smile. "That was a hell of a hit, Leonard." They shook hands, no hatred, no blame, just two warriors who knew the game always had its price. As Leonard walked down the cold white hallway, he looked up at the fluorescent lights and felt he'd just left a battlefield, carrying a piece of his lost soul. From that day, he grew quieter. Teammates still called him the Beast. Fans still chanted his name, but Leonard's spark faded. In every cheer, he heard the crack of bones, Montana's fall. "They cheered my violence," he later said, "but no one saw my pain." In lonely evenings, he watched that tape dozens of times, not to boast, but to ask, why did victory leave him so empty? When the Giants entered Super Bowl 25 and won, Leonard still played a key role, but the joy was different. As confetti fell, he looked up at the white flakes filling the sky, but his mind saw only Montana's fall, lying still on the grass. That tackle made him a legend and a curse that followed him for life. Later, when someone mentioned the hit heard around the world, Leonard only smiled, eyes distant. It was just football, but deep in his heart, he knew it was the moment the game took his soul. The 1,990 hit propelled Leonard Marshall to immortal heights, but also carved the first crack in his mind. He became a symbol of strength, yet a victim of the violence celebrated by others. The nation hailed him as a hero, but no one heard his sighs behind the lights. That hit changed NFL history and destroyed part of the man in Leonard Marshall. He became immortal and forever cursed. Super Bowl 125, Tampa, January 1991. A year after the fateful hit on Joe Montana, Leonard Marshall returned to football's grandest stage, but his body was no longer the same. His left shoulder had a torn tendon mid-season. Doctors warned one more hard hit could cost him feeling in his arm forever. Leonard listened, nodded, then suited up, tightened his helmet, and stepped onto the field with his team. Not because he wasn't afraid, but because he didn't know how to live without fighting. For him, pain had become breathing. As the band played the national anthem, Leonard bowed his head, tears falling onto his helmet. A reporter later asked why he cried. He answered softly, "Not for pride, for pain." That game was a symphony of adversity, the underdog Giants against the mighty Buffalo Bills, who carried a no mercy mantra. Both sides fought like ancient warriors. Despite his shoulder, Leonard threw himself into every tackle, each hit making him hear his tendons scream, but his eyes never wavered. Bill Parcells watched from the sideline, silent, knowing Leonard was playing with what was left of his body. The nail-biting game stretched to the final seconds. As the clock ticked down, the Bills had a fateful chance. Scott Norwood's 47-yard field goal. The stadium held its breath. The ball sailed, veered, and missed the uprights. The Giants won. The team collided in embraces, screaming and crying. Lawrence Taylor lifted Leonard off the ground, shouting, "We did it again, big man!" Leonard tried to smile, but his face twisted as pain shot from his shoulder to his neck. He couldn't raise his left arm to hoist the trophy. Only his trembling right hand touched the gleaming Lombardi. That night in the locker room, champagne sprayed, reporters swarmed, and Parcells spoke of the pride of the Giants' soldiers. But Leonard sat still, clutching his shoulder, smiling with empty eyes. Teammates didn't notice. They thought he was emotional. Only Leonard knew something in his mind was fracturing. The headaches returned, worse than ever, with an unceasing ringing. Leaving the stadium, flashing cameras left him dizzy, his head exploding. A reporter asked how he felt. Leonard only said, "I'm tired," and walked away. On the flight back to New York, the team slept to the hum of engines, but Leonard stayed awake. He stared out the window, moonlight reflecting on the glass, then on his calloused hand wearing the championship ring. He touched it, feeling both pride and confusion. Outside, the world hailed him as a hero, but in his head, Leonard heard the crack of bones, Montana's fall, his own head hitting the turf. The sounds blended into a distorted song. He whispered, "I won, but what did I lose to get it?" During the Manhattan Parade, hundreds of thousands lined the streets, waving blue and white flags. Leonard stood on the open-top bus, smiling, waving, but beneath his coat, bandages wrapped his shoulder heavily. He forced a smile until his cheeks ached, then sat, silently watching the crowd below. They cheer, he thought, but they don't know I'm breaking apart inside. As bright lights hit his face, everything blurred as if the world was slipping away. Months later, Leonard visited a hospital for tests. Doctors said he had nerve damage in his neck, signs of severe concussion, and should consider resting. But the NFL had no room for weakness. The Giants needed him, coaches needed him, fans needed him. So Leonard returned to practice, injected with painkillers, shoulder taped, and kept going. Each hit briefly blackened his vision, but he stood firm, as if falling would collapse his entire world. In an interview the next year, he was asked his most memorable career moment. Leonard looked at his hand where the Super Bowl ring gleamed and said, "The moment I realized that sometimes glory and destruction are the same thing." He smiled, but his eyes were wet. Leaving the studio, the host whispered, "He looks like he just came back from a war." End quote. Years later, Leonard kept that Super Bowl ring in a small wooden box beside his parents' photo and an old letter from Parcells. "You were the heart of our defense," it read. But some nights, he woke in a cold sweat, his heart pounding, his head ringing with a strange sound like distant waves. No one understood. No one knew. Super Bowl 25 was Leonard Marshall's final glory, a victory bought with blood, painkillers, and a piece of memory forever lost. As confetti fell in Tampa, he looked up, watching it drift like snow, covering his stinging eyes. He didn't know if he was crying for joy or pain, perhaps both. And as the stands roared, one truth echoed in his mind. He had the ring, but the cracks in his mind had begun to show. In 1992, as the Super Bowl glory faded into memory, Leonard Marshall received the news he knew was coming but couldn't stop the ache in his heart. The New York Giants, the team that nurtured, forged, and defined him, decided to part ways. The press called it a strategic move, but to Leonard it was a cold goodbye. He sat in the locker room, before the wooden locker etched with his name for nearly a decade, gazing at old gloves, a scratched helmet, photos of teammates taped to the door. A place once filled with laughter now echoed only with the hum of a vacuum cleaner in the hallway. Lawrence Taylor, his closest brother, shook his hand and whispered, "We were immortal once, remember?" Leonard only smiled. In his eyes was something both proud and broken. As the locker room door closed, a chapter of his life closed with it. He signed a short-term deal with the New York Jets. Same city, same blue, but a completely different world. There, no one called him the Beast. No one mentioned his glorious Giants days. He became just another name on a long list of revolving players, a massive figure lost among young rookies. His body was then rotten with time, right shoulder still aching, neck stiff as iron, head perpetually heavy. Each morning, he sat for minutes just to bend down and tie his shoes. But on the field, instinct surged. Though no longer agile, he charged into every collision, as if trying to cling to the last fragments of himself. Each tackle was his way of telling the world he still existed, even if only as a shadow of the giant he once was. The Jets weren't the Giants. No more practices filled with laughter. No more family-like bonds. When he entered the locker room, unfamiliar faces looked up, nodded politely, then bent back to their phones. Games ended. New teammates headed straight to their cars, no raucous celebrations, no recounting victory moments. Leonard sat alone in the corner, removing his pads, staring at his swollen shoulder and trembling hands. He thought of the past Giants days in white snow, brilliant lights, crowds chanting, "Marshall, Marshall," all now fading in his memory. After one season, the Jets cut him. Leonard joined the Washington Redskins, hoping to recapture some golden breath, but his body betrayed him. He played a few games, then sat on the bench, then vanished from the active roster. No farewell, no big headlines. Just a brief note in the sports section. Leonard Marshall, veteran defensive end, retires after 10 seasons. 10 seasons, 2 Super Bowl rings, hundreds of tackles, summed up in one short sentence. On his final day, Leonard walked out of RFK Stadium, carrying his bag. The sky was gray, drizzle falling lightly. He paused, glancing back at the empty seats. No applause, no cameras on him, just wind whistling through the vacant stands. He remembered the 1987 Rose Bowl night, confetti falling like snow, millions chanting his name. Now, everything was eerily silent. He touched the iron railing, feeling the cold seep into his skin. "Is that it?" he asked himself, then turned and walked away. Each step felt weighted, carrying the echo of a collapsing past behind him. In the months after retirement, Leonard faced what no one prepares athletes for: emptiness. No more practice whistles, no teammates, no turf to fall on. Just medical bills, doctor appointments, and relentless chronic pain. Each morning he stared in the mirror, trying to recognize the man looking back, a face aged beyond years, eyes dimming, smile rigid. Old friends scattered. Some became coaches, others broadcasters. He didn't know where he belonged. The NFL had been his whole world, and now, with it gone, only a void remained. One evening, Leonard drove past MetLife Stadium, the Giants' home now more modern, brighter. He pulled over, turned off the engine, sat watching distant lights. A cold wind blew, carrying faint music from the game inside. He heard cheers, but didn't recognize who was playing. For a moment, he thought he heard the crowd calling his name, but it was just an echo in his memory. As he drove away, Leonard glanced back in the rearview. The stadium lights faded, and he knew it wasn't just the glow of a place, it was the last light of the life he once belonged to. A glorious era had truly ended, quietly and gently like a final breath. He walked out of the stadium for the last time, and no one noticed. In the early 2000s, Leonard Marshall lived quietly in Florida, in a small house overlooking the bay. Fans gradually forgot his name. Once praising articles gathered dust in memorabilia boxes. He tried to reclaim normalcy, coaching kids in football, speaking at events on sportsmanship, starting a small business. But then, one morning in 2006, staring in the mirror, he realized he couldn't remember why he was there. In a brief moment, Leonard, the man who once read complex NFL schemes in seconds, couldn't recall what he'd meant to do. That feeling was like a small crack in his mind, silent but spreading, like the roar of a stadium slowly fading. In the months after, things worsened. He suffered chronic insomnia, headaches throbbing like someone knocking from inside. Some nights, he sat alone on the porch, eyes distant, muttering old play calls. His wife, Janine, stepped out, touched his shoulder lightly, but Leonard startled like waking from a distant dream. "You okay?" she asked. He forced a smile. "Just tired, I guess." But both knew it was more than tiredness. Unexplained anger flared sometimes over a small noise, sometimes harsh light. He yelled, slammed doors, then sat dazed, apologizing in a trembling voice. By 2009, his memory shed like autumn leaves. Leonard could recall Super Bowl 1986 details, every tackle, every cheer, but forgot his daughter's birthday. Once, at breakfast, Janine asked if he remembered what day it was. Leonard stared long, then shook his head. It was their 18th wedding anniversary. She forced a smile, but fear grew inside. The husband who was once a fortress now wandered like a lost child in his own memory's maze. In 2010, he joined the NFL's program for former players. There, Leonard met familiar faces, men he'd battled with on the field. But all bore the same disease: dazed eyes, trembling hands, sentences halting mid-thought from forgotten intent. They called it CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Doctors explained thousands of career hits had gradually damaged their brains. Leonard listened, nodded, but didn't want to believe. "I was a warrior," he whispered. "Warriors don't lose their memory." But months later, he accepted the truth. This war had no victory. One afternoon in 2012, Leonard drove to pick up medication. He drove 2 hours, across 3 highways, before realizing he was lost. When police found him, he sat in the car, hands shaking, eyes vacant. When Janine arrived, he only said, "I forgot why I left." That broke her to tears. From then, she never let him drive alone. His young daughter, Ariana, then 8, began noticing something wrong. One evening, Leonard sat in the living room, staring at the family photo on the wall. Tears fell unconsciously. Ariana ran over, placed a hand on his knee, asked innocently, "Daddy, why are you crying?" Leonard bent down, stroked her hair, voice choked. "Because I can't remember why I started." That simple, heartbreaking words were the first time he admitted what the family knew: his memory was slipping away. From then, Leonard's life drowned in fog. He forgot familiar faces, appointments, even woke some days not recognizing himself in the mirror. One morning, he called his wife, "Mom," then cried, realizing the mistake. Nightmares of the past returned: Montana falling, stadium lights, roaring crowds. Midnight, he bolted up, drenched in sweat, heart racing. Janine held him, but Leonard trembled like a child. "I hear the cheers, but I don't know why they're cheering." In 2013, doctors diagnosed clear signs of early-stage CTE, short-term memory loss, emotional dysregulation, behavioral control issues. He heard the results in silence, saying nothing. Leaving the hospital, Janine asked what he thought. Leonard stared distant. "I thought I'd die on the field, not in my own head." She held his hand, but Leonard didn't squeeze back, his eyes empty, as if looking through the present. Fans sometimes recognized him at Giants events. They approached, shook hands, said, "You're a legend." Leonard smiled, nodded, but sometimes asked back, "Which team did I play for?" That question stunned many. The man who once made millions cheer now couldn't remember why he was loved. Evenings, Leonard often sat on the porch listening to waves. Janine said he'd mutter, "I remember the stadium roar, but now it's just an echo." Sometimes he closed his eyes, smiled as if hearing sounds from an irrecoverable time. No one knew what he recalled: maybe the opening whistle, the cheers, or just himself, the man born from the NFL's storm. Each time Ariana ran to hug her dad, Leonard bent down, patted her back lightly, but his eyes seemed to gaze into a farther void. Headaches still came every evening, and memories slipped away, bit by bit, like sand through fingers. Outside, the world still spoke of Leonard Marshall as an American football legend, but inside, he was only a shadow of himself, a man slowly devoured by echoes in his mind, where glory and tragedy merged. The roar that sustained him now, just an echo, and he couldn't escape it. In 2013, Leonard Marshall sat in UCLA's neurology clinic, amid antiseptic smells and cold fluorescent lights. The doctor asked him to undergo brain tests, exams many ex-NFL players had taken, but no one truly wanted the results. On the wall, screens showed modern brain scans, lit with ominous dark patches. Leonard sat straight, hands clasped tightly on his thighs, heart pounding like awaiting the opening whistle. He'd faced men over 300 pounds, heard bones crack under pads without flinching. But that moment when the doctor turned the screen toward him chilled him more than any tackle in life. The flashing bright areas on the screen in the frontal lobe, amygdala, brain stem, needed no explanation. Leonard understood that was him dying slowly. The doctor pointed to the blurry dark region, voice soft but grave. Could be signs of CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Very clear. Those words sliced like a slow knife through the calm Leonard tried to hold. He nodded, forced a rigid smile. "Is it curable?" he asked, though knowing the answer. The doctor shook his head slightly. "No, Leonard, but we can help you manage it." A long silence. He stared at the screen, seeing his brain like a shattered map. The places that once held memories of victories, the roar of the crowd, the faces of his wife and daughter, were now shrouded in gray, murky patches of damage. Leonard gripped the chair arms until his knuckles turned white. He heard his heartbeat pounding in his ears, strong, steady, hollow. His body was still strong, still that of a warrior. But inside, his brain, the soul of it all, was crumbling day by day. In that moment, he realized he was no longer fighting opponents on the field, but his own body. And this was the one battle he could not win. On the drive back to the hotel, Leonard said nothing. Janine sat beside him, holding his hand. The California sky blazed with sunlight, but in their hearts there was only fog. "Are you okay?" she asked. He nodded, eyes fixed ahead. "I'm just thinking, if one day I forget everything, will my daughter still know me?" Janine fell silent. The question cut into her heart like a knife. That night, Leonard sat on the balcony, gazing at the city lights stretching into the distance. Ariana was asleep in the next room, curled up in her blanket, clutching the teddy bear he'd given her when she was 3. He watched her for a long time, a fear he'd never known swelling inside him. "I don't want her to lose her father twice," he whispered. "Once when I left the NFL, and now, when I lose my own memory." His tears fell, slow and heavy, not from weakness. They were the tears of a man who understood that sometimes the real wounds weren't on the body, they were in a place no one could see. In the weeks that followed, Leonard began speaking publicly about his diagnosis. He didn't choose silence or avoidance. "If I don't speak, others will die in silence like me," he said in an interview. His voice was slow, raspy, sometimes halting as his memory slipped. He spoke of the headaches, the sleepless nights, the 2-hour drives where he didn't know where he was going. The reporter looked at him, speechless. Behind that large face was no longer pride, but the exhaustion of a man betrayed by his own glory. UCLA invited him to join their research program on former players' brains. Leonard agreed. He sat in a white room, where doctors attached wires to his head, measuring brain waves, recording every tiny movement. He heard the steady beeping of the machines and suddenly remembered the whistle at MetLife Stadium years ago. Sounds of the past flooded back: the collisions, the crowd, Parcells shouting, Lawrence Taylor's loud laugh. But when a doctor asked him to recall the year of his first Super Bowl, Leonard froze. After a few seconds, he said softly, "I'm not sure anymore." That evening, Janine found him standing before a mirror, staring at his reflection. "What are you doing?" she asked. Leonard didn't turn. "I'm trying to see how much of me is still in these eyes." She walked to him, wrapping her arms around him. "You're still you," she said. But Leonard only smiled sadly. He didn't say it, but he knew he was fading piece by piece. After the diagnosis, Leonard lived more slowly. He avoided noise, preferring early morning walks along the beach. The waves crashed against the sand like the steady beat of memory. Some days, he talked to the waves, recounting his Giants days. Joe Montana, his fear of losing his memory. He knew the waves wouldn't answer, but at least they listened. One morning, a doctor called to say UCLA's research would be published results, confirming clear evidence of CTE in NFL players. Leonard stayed silent. He'd suspected, feared it, but now, with the truth laid bare, he no longer trembled. He said only one thing, "At least now I know the name of my enemy." That evening, he sat before the mirror again. The light cast shadows on his face, now etched with faint wrinkles, his eyes deep, but still holding a spark. "I've faced 300-pound men," he whispered, "but no hit ever hurt like this truth." Then he smiled, lightly, but genuinely the smile of a warrior who knew he couldn't win but chose to stand and face the darkness consuming him. He'd faced 300-pound giants, but no hit hurt more than the truth. After the fateful UCLA diagnosis, Leonard Marshall didn't retreat or stay silent. He'd spent a lifetime standing strong against collisions, and now, facing a disease ravaging his brain, he stood again. But this time, not with a helmet and pads, but with his voice. In 2014, he joined the Concussion Legacy Foundation, an organization researching and advocating for awareness of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE. They invited him to speak at their first conference in Boston, where former players, doctors, and families of those lost to CTE sat quietly in the auditorium. When Leonard took the stage, no one knew what he'd say, but as his deep, heavy voice rang out, the room fell utterly silent. "I used to think I was the strongest man in the world," he said. "I thought pain was something to be proud of. But now I know. The scariest truth is that we stayed silent too long. He paused, eyes scanning the room, then continued, "If my pain can save one kid, just one, it's all worth it." The entire room stood, applauding endlessly. That was the moment Leonard Marshall once remembered, for his devastating tackle on Joe Montana became a voice of courage, not of physical strength, but of truth. From then on, he traveled across America, speaking at schools, colleges, and NFL conferences. He shared his journey without hiding or embellishing. He spoke of sleepless nights, forgetting his daughter's name, the ringing in his head like a crowd that never stopped. At every talk, he held a small photo of Ariana. "My daughter is why I speak," he told reporters. "I don't want any other kid to grow up asking, 'Why did my dad forget me?'" Not everyone supported him. The NFL, the giant empire of American sports, avoided mentioning him in their materials and seminars. They called people like Leonard troublemakers, negative voices. Some former teammates, still tied to the league, kept their distance. Some refused to take photos with him. One even said, "Leonard's ruining football's image." He heard it all and only smiled sadly. "I spent half my life protecting this sport," he said. "Now I just want to protect the people who'll play it." His interviews began appearing on CNN, ESPN, the New York Times. The press called him the conscience of football, a title not of glamour, but of the weight of truth. In every speech, he spoke of his youth, the naive belief that strength could conquer all. "They taught us that if you're hurt, keep going. If you see stars, stand up. If you hear an explosion in your head, don't tell anyone." And we believed. We kept playing. We kept crashing into the wall until the wall collapsed, and it collapsed inside our heads. Those weren't theories. They were testimony. At a 2016 TEDx talk, the spotlight lit his face, a face once heroic, now etched with time. He spoke of the night Ariana asked, "Daddy, why are you crying?" And he replied, "I don't remember why I started." The story silenced the room. Then he looked up, voice hoarse but firm, to the back row. "Don't let your kids ask that question." Many reporters said that when Leonard appeared, audiences no longer saw a player, they saw a living warning. He didn't speak to complain, but to awaken. "Football is the game I love," he said. "But no game is worth losing your memory, your identity, your soul." Despite his declining health, Leonard kept traveling, carrying the spirit of the warrior he once was. He met mothers who lost sons to CTE, former players who no longer recognized themselves, and they embraced like the last survivors of a battle no one won. When asked why he kept going, he smiled, "Because I still have a voice. When it's gone, I want to know I used it for what's right." Some in the NFL began to listen. Safety regulations, concussion protocols, and support policies for former players slowly improved. Leonard never took credit, but everyone knew if not for him and others like him, the truth would have stayed buried. When a reporter asked if he had regrets, Leonard replied, "No, I took down hundreds of players. Now I just want to take down the silence." One night after a speech in Boston, Leonard sat in the empty auditorium, looking at the rows of seats under dim lights. He remembered the crowds of old, the cheers every time he sacked a quarterback. Back then, he was celebrated for his strength. Today, he stood here, heard for his truth. Both hurt, but only one gave him meaning. On the wall, someone had pinned a photo of him speaking, with the caption, "From the field to the fight, Leonard Marshall, the man who refused to stay silent." He looked at the photo, smiled faintly, and stepped outside into the cold, free night air. In his heart, he knew he'd reclaimed a piece of his identity, not the football hero, but the last soldier of justice. That year, at the humanitarian awards ceremony, Leonard took the stage, voice raspy but proud. "I used to take down the toughest quarterbacks in the world. Now I'm trying to take down denial." The crowd stood, applauding long and loud, and in that moment, Leonard knew that though his body had betrayed him, his soul still stood tall. He'd taken down the greatest quarterbacks, now he was taking down denial. In the fall of 2022, the New Jersey sky was clear and cool, as if the city held its breath for something coming. At MetLife Stadium, tens of thousands of fans in Giants blue packed the stands. In the center of the field, a silver-haired man with a slow gait but sharp, deep eyes stepped out to booming music. Leonard Marshall, once forgotten, once seen as a symbol of violence, once turned away by the team he loved, was now inducted into the Giants' Ring of Honor. 30 years after leaving this place in silence, Leonard returned. Amid cheers he thought he'd never hear again, the entire stadium chanted in unison, "Marshall! Marshall!" The sound was like a wind blowing back through time, through years of glory, pain, and solitude. He paused in the middle of the field, hands trembling as he held the microphone. The light from the giant screen illuminated his time-worn face, the face of a man who had fought his entire life, not just on the field but within his own mind. Across the stands, Janine and Ariana stood with his former teammates, Lawrence Taylor, Carl Banks, Harry Carson, brothers who had shared blood and tears with him. As the music faded, Leonard looked up, took a deep breath, and spoke slowly. 30 years ago, I left this place without saying goodbye. I carried glory, but also wounds no one could see. Today, I return, not to be honored, but to say thank you." The applause thundered. Leonard raised his hand, pointing to the night sky where flares began to spark. "For Dad," he said, voice breaking, "for every hit, for every pain." Under the lights, tears fell down his cheeks, glinting like glass. In that moment, he was no longer a player, a patient, or an icon, but a son speaking to his father after 40 years of silence. He recalled that voice over the phone long ago. "I'm proud of you, son." Today, he didn't need anyone else to say it because he could finally say it to himself. As the video played old moments, the tackle on Montana, hoisting the Lombardi Trophy, Leonard smiling brightly among teammates, the crowd stood. They no longer saw the monster who ended Montana. They saw the real man, one who fell, endured, rose again, and now found peace. At 61, Leonard Marshall finally touched something he never thought he deserved: forgiveness. Not from the NFL, not from the press, but from his own heart. After the ceremony, Leonard walked out through the tunnel, where the light softened, and only the faint echo of his footsteps remained. He looked around the old walls, familiar walkways, the damp smell of the field, everything unlocking memories of a lifetime. When Ariana ran to embrace him, Leonard bowed his head, smiled, tears falling onto his daughter's face. "Did you see?" he said. "I'm still part of them." Ariana nodded, hugging tighter. That evening, in the quiet hotel room, Leonard hung the Ring of Honor plaque the team gave him on the wall. He sat in a chair, staring at it for a long time. Outside, the Hudson River breeze carried the faint sound of lingering cheers. For the first time in years, he felt peace in his heart. No more resentment, no more guilt, no more why questions echoing in his mind. He closed his eyes, hearing that sound, not the crowd, but the man inside him smiling. A reporter asked, "Do you feel you've been forgiven?" Leonard replied slowly, "No one really needed to forgive me. I just needed to learn to forgive myself." He spoke and laughed, a light but genuine laugh, the laugh of a man who'd weathered storms and no longer feared thunder. The next day, headlines flooded the press. Leonard Marshall returns home. But for Leonard, home was no longer the stadium or the team. It was the feeling when his heart stopped fighting and began to accept. He posted a short line on social media. "It took me 30 years to forgive myself, but tonight, I did." Thousands commented, not just Giants fans, but those who'd heard him speak about CTE, about darkness and hope. That night, Leonard sat on the balcony, looking toward the still-lit MetLife Stadium in the dark. He whispered, "Thank you for giving me one last chance to say goodbye." And as the breeze carried the distant echo of the stands, he smiled and closed his eyes. After 40 years of fighting on the field, in life, and in his own mind, Leonard Marshall finally found the peace he deserved. No more drums, no more cheers, just the steady rhythm of a man who learned to forgive, love himself again, and accept every scar as part of life. For the first time in decades, the Giant could truly rest. After the night of honor at MetLife, Leonard Marshall returned to a simpler, but not quieter, life. He understood that if fate had let him survive those dark years, the rest of his life must be used to plant something anew. In 2023, he accepted a teaching position at Seton Hall University, leading a course on leadership and ethics in sports. No helmet, no stadium lights. Leonard stood before students in a simple dress shirt, hands trembling slightly from nerve damage. But when he spoke, the room fell silent. "I used to think glory was everything," he said, voice hoarse but warm. "But glory without gratitude is just an empty trophy." That became the opening line of every lecture, a philosophy forged from blood, tears, and years trading memory for fame. Students admired him not for being a legend, but for his honesty. Leonard didn't hide his trembling hands or the headaches that forced him to pause mid-lecture to breathe. He told them about losing himself, forgetting his daughter's name, the fear of looking in the mirror and not recognizing the man there. "If one day you reach the top," he said, "remember that compassion must never come second to victory." His classes weren't just about sports, they were lessons in empathy and resilience. In 2024, Leonard was invited as the keynote speaker for a Martin Luther King Jr. memorial event in New Jersey. As he took the stage, applause roared, but he didn't smile. He bowed his head in silence, then began with a simple line, "I've learned that scars are the language of life, and that anyone can turn pain into something good." He shared his journey from the belittled Franklin boy to Giants star, to a man robbed of memory by CTE, to finding meaning by helping others. His voice was slow, emotional, and when he finished, the room stood, tears streaming down many faces. A journalist later wrote, "Leonard Marshall didn't just speak of resilience, he was its living proof, a testament to forgiveness and strength." Outside teaching, Leonard spent much of his time mentoring retired NFL players facing post-career crises, bankruptcy, addiction, or loss of direction. He called this small group the locker room after the lights go out. They met monthly, no cameras, no media. Leonard sat in the center, listening to each story. A man who lost his wife to violence, another who nearly ended his life in despair, another who couldn't recall his Super Bowl day. He didn't preach, just held their hands, sharing his own life. "I've been where you are," he said, "but I learned no one is weak for asking for help." Once, a young ex-player broke down. Admitting he was addicted to painkillers and feared dying, Leonard stepped forward, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said, "I lived on pills too, but pills don't heal wounds. Only courage does." The room fell silent. From that day, Leonard became a brother, teacher, and savior to many lost souls. His health continued to decline. His right hand trembled more. Dizziness forced him to grip walls while walking. Some days, he forgot the lecture he'd prepared, relying on students to remind him. But never once did Leonard cancel a class or speech. "As long as I can speak," he said, "I'll tell this story, so no one has to live in darkness like I did." Each evening, he returned home, sat at a small wooden table, opened his laptop slowly, typing lesson plans, his trembling hands making uneven keystrokes. But he persisted. "As long as I can tell it," he told Janine, "I'm still winning." Once, a student asked, "Do you ever wish you hadn't played football?" Leonard looked at the young man, silent for a long moment. "No," he said, "because football took my memory, but it also gave me this heart." The class fell silent. In their eyes, he was no longer a giant's hero, but proof that humanity can rise from ruin. In recent years, he appeared less on TV, but students and young athletes still came to hear him, sent thank you letters. A newspaper wrote, "Leonard Marshall no longer teaches how to win, he teaches how to live." And perhaps that was his greatest victory. On the last night of the semester, Leonard left class late. He stood by the window, looking at the sports field where students tossed a football under yellow lights. He smiled, trembling hand gripping the door. In that moment, he felt peace, a feeling his younger self never knew. Football gave him everything and took nearly all. But from those losses, he found life's true meaning, not conquest, but healing. Leonard Marshall no longer chased touchdowns, he chased redemption. In 2025, Leonard Marshall, 63, lives in a small seaside home in Boca Raton, Florida. Mornings, he sits by the window, sunlight on his weathered face, eyes cloudy but still warm. His right hand trembles slightly holding a coffee mug, and sometimes he pauses mid-sentence, trying to recall a name. CTE has advanced, his memory fading like an old film, faces, games, numbers once etched in his mind, now mere floating fragments. But one thing he never forgets: the laughter of children playing football outside. Each time he hears it, Leonard smiles, a real, gentle, peaceful smile, as if all wounds, all pain, are washed away in that sound. In his final years, Leonard is no longer an NFL legend, no longer in sports headlines. He's a teacher, a father, a man at peace with himself. His health is frail, his wealth diminished from years of charity, but his heart is lighter than ever. Mornings, he goes to the beach early, sitting silently watching the sunrise, holding his old helmet, the one that carried him through glory and blood. Its blue paint is faded, a small dent inside from his first jarring hit. He strokes it like a sacred relic, grateful and fearful. Neighbors say Leonard often sits on a wooden chair in the yard, local kids running up, tossing a ball, and he smiles watching them play. One day, a boy asked, "Who are you, mister?" Leonard smiled, taking a few seconds to reply, "I used to play this game a long time ago." Then he took off his old helmet, handed it to the boy, hands shaking but voice steady. "Don't play like I did. Play safer than I did." The boy looked up, puzzled. But Leonard gazed at him warmly, the look of a man who knew glory's cost, and no child should pay with their memory. In his final lectures at Seton Hall, Leonard still told students, "Success isn't measured by touchdowns, but by the people you lift up when they fall." Though his mind slowed, he never forgot that lesson. The young students, a generation that never saw him play, sat rapt as he shared, "I spent my life being strong. Now I just want to be kind." Ariana, his daughter, now grown, visits weekends. She walks him slowly by the sea. Sometimes he calls her by her mother's name, sometimes forgets where he is, but always holds her hand tightly. Once, Ariana asked. "Do you ever regret playing football?" Leonard looked into the distance, smiled softly. "No, because football took my memory, but it taught me to love you with all the heart I have left." Ariana cried, and he held her hand tighter, trembling but firm like he once gripped teammates' hands before a game. Amid headaches and tremors, Leonard still writes. He writes slowly, letters uneven, but full of feeling. In a final interview, he said a line that silenced the room. "They called me a monster, but all I ever wanted was to make them proud." People once feared him for the tackle that shook the world, once saw him as a symbol of violence. But today, as he sits there, voice hoarse, eyes cloudy, people only see a man full of kindness, full of sorrow, and full of love. Leonard Marshall doesn't need to be deified. He just needs to be understood. As the disease progressed, Leonard's memory grew as fragile as mist. Some mornings, he walked to the beach, calling out names of old teammates, but only the wind answered. Some afternoons, he sat in class, recounting old lessons, but stopped midway, unable to remember. Yet he still smiled, still continued, because for Leonard, speaking was living. Every story he told was another beat of an unyielding heart. His life was like a symphony in many movements, beginning with dreams, radiant in victory, shattered in silence, and ending in gentle awakening. Leonard is no longer the giant's giant, no longer the monster who ended Montana. He is proof that sometimes immortality lies not in strength, but in the compassion rediscovered at last. One afternoon, as a gentle breeze blew across the beach, Leonard sat on an old wooden chair, helmet in hand. A boy from the neighborhood ran up, ball in hand, eyes bright. "Mister, can you teach me to throw?" Leonard laughed, reached out with trembling hands to take the ball, then threw it softly, the arc curving beautifully like years ago. The boy cheered, and Leonard watched, eyes distant but kind. "Remember," he said softly, "don't play to become a hero. Play to become a good person." Late afternoon, Janine stepped out. Seeing Leonard still sitting there, wind scattering papers from his hands, the scribbled lines he was writing. One sheet remained on the table, only 2 short sentences, written in shaky script. "In a world that worships power, he taught us compassion. In a game built on collision, he taught us connection." She picked up the paper, placed it back on his chest. Leonard smiled faintly, saying nothing. His eyes closed, not from exhaustion, but from peace. In the sound of crashing waves, Janine heard what seemed like distant cheers, not from the stands, but from memory. A life full of collisions, full of loss, now closed in serenity. On the table, beside the old helmet, was a photo of Leonard standing in the middle of MetLife Field in 2022, hand raised in salute, eyes shining in the sunset of his life. Beneath the photo, engraved in silver, "Honor the men who bled for the game before they forget who they are." And so, Leonard Marshall, the man once praised, misunderstood, then forgiven, left a legacy not of tackles, but of humanity, courage, and a reminder that behind every warrior is a human being. And for Leonard, that giant finally found immortality not in others' memories, but in the compassion he left for the world. Looking back at Leonard Marshall's journey, one cannot help but ache at the price a giant paid to light the pride of New York and American football. From the Franklin boy called too big, too slow to the 100-degree LSU forge, from the day Parcells and Belichick saw the fire in his eyes, to the Big Blue Wrecking Crew Heroes 15, 5 sacks, 1,985. Twice hoisting Lombardi in Super Bowl 21 and 21. The moment his father first said, "I'm proud of you, son," blending with the night of vomiting, headaches, champions don't complain. The 1,990 collision with Montana, turning glory into a curse when media called him the monster who ended Montana. Then UCLA, 2013 illuminating brain damage, and the choked answer to daughter Ariana, "Because I can't remember why I started." But from the depths of tragedy, Leonard chose truth, joining the Concussion Legacy Foundation, telling America, "If my pain saves one kid, it's worth it." Shunned by some but called the conscience of football. The circle closed in reconciliation. Ring of Honor, 2022. The Whisper, for Dad, for every hit, for every pain. Classes at Seton Hall, MLK Speech 2024, and the image of him handing his old helmet to a boy. "Don't play like me, play safer than me." That legacy reminds Americans that glory cannot be separated from gratitude and responsibility. Prioritize children's safety. Invest in brain injury research. Care for ex-athletes' mental health. And measure value by those lifted up, not just scores. In a society that worships strength, Leonard taught us compassion. In a sport built on collision, he taught connection, so we applaud not just for touchdowns, but for the humanity of those who bled for our shared dream. If Leonard Marshall's story touches your heart, please subscribe to the channel to join us in continuing to honor those who sacrificed their lives for faith and courage. Thank you for listening. See you in the next video, where we'll continue the journeys of true heroes, strong not just on the field, but resilient in life.